Almost didn't go on that trip at all. My hip had been acting up since February, and my daughter, she lives out in Phoenix, had been calling me every other week saying, "Mum, you need to get out of that house. You've been alone since Dad passed. Just come visit." Even for a week, I kept putting it off. There was always something. The gutters needed cleaning. The car needed an oil change. The truth is, I just wasn't ready to be away from the house your father and you built together, brick by brick, 31 years of your life soaked into every wall. But in April, I finally said yes. I booked a flight out of Columbus to Phoenix, packed a light bag. I'm 67, I know how to pack light, and I kissed the front door frame the way I always do before a long trip. My son knew I was going. I told him 2 weeks before. He even called the morning of, said, "Safe travels, Mum. I'll check on the house." I thought that was sweet. I thought he was being a good son. I should have paid closer attention to the way he said it. Not, "Call me if you need anything." Not, "I'll swing by and grab your mail." He said, "I'll check on the house," like it was already his. The flight was supposed to leave at 6:40 in the morning. I was already through security, already sitting at the gate with my decaf and my crossword puzzle, when the board flipped to delayed. Then, 40 minutes later, cancelled. A mechanical issue, they said. The next available flight wasn't until the following evening, and I'd already arranged for my daughter to pick me up that morning, already told her I'd be there for breakfast. I sat there in that plastic airport chair thinking about it for a few minutes, and then I thought, I'm not sitting in this airport for 30 hours. I'll just go home, sleep in my own bed, take the morning flight tomorrow. I didn't call my son to tell him I was coming back. I don't know why I didn't. I suppose it just didn't occur to me. It was my house. I didn't think I needed to announce myself. The cab dropped me off a little before 9. The street was quiet. It was a Thursday morning. Most of the neighbors were at work. I came up the front walk with my rolling bag behind me, and that's when I saw it. There was a truck parked in my driveway. Not my son's truck. A bigger one. A cargo van, the kind you rent by the day from one of those moving places. The back doors were hanging open. I could see the edge of something familiar inside, something dark green and upholstered, and my stomach dropped before my brain had even finished processing what I was looking at. That was my armchair, the wingback one with the brass tacks, the one I reupholstered in 1998. Because your father loved it so much, I couldn't stand the thought of throwing it away. I stood on the front walk for a moment, and I couldn't move. The front door was closed. Everything looked normal from the outside except for that van, except for my armchair sitting in the back of it with a moving blanket half thrown over it, and I thought, what in the world is going on? Then I heard voices from the side of the house. I walked around the corner, and there was my son. He was crouched down by the back door, the one that leads from the kitchen into the garage, and he had something in his hand, a tool of some kind. His wife was standing a few feet behind him with her arms crossed, looking at her phone. They hadn't heard me come up. The cab had pulled away quietly. My rolling bag was small. I was just standing there in my own backyard, watching my son try to get into my house. My back door has a separate deadbolt I installed after a break-in 2 streets over, 3 years ago. My son doesn't have a key to that one. He has the front door key. I gave him a copy years ago for emergencies. But he'd never asked about the back. And from the looks of it, he'd used the front door key to get in earlier that morning, taken what he could load in one trip, and now he was trying to force the back door because he needed more. I just stood there for a moment. I want you to understand that I am not a dramatic person. I have never been the type to make a scene. I grew up in a household where you didn't raise your voice, where you solved problems quietly, and you kept your business to yourself. In 67 years, I have never once screamed at my children. But standing there watching my son crouch over my back door lock with a tool in his hand, while his wife stood behind him scrolling through her phone as though this were perfectly ordinary, I said, "What are you doing?" My voice came out very flat, quieter than I expected. My son spun around so fast he lost his balance and grabbed the doorframe. His wife's head snapped up, and the two of them just stared at me. Nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time. Then my son said, "Mom." Just that. My name, not his explanation. His wife found her voice faster than he did. She said, we thought you were gone. We were going to surprise you. We were cleaning out the garage." I looked at her. I looked at my son. I looked at the tools still in his hand, and I said, "Come around to the front, all three of us." I left them there and I walked back around to the front of the house and I stood next to that van and I looked into the back of it properly for the first time. There was my armchair. There was the side table from the living room, your father's side of the couch, where he kept his reading glasses and his TV remote. There were 3 boxes, sealed with tape, and I recognized the handwriting on the side of one of them. It was my daughter-in-law's handwriting. She had labeled them. She had brought packing tape and a marker, and she had sat in my living room and packed up my things and labeled the boxes in her own handwriting. There were also 2 paper bags from what I could see, and sticking out the top of one of them was the corner of something gold. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a small picture frame. Inside was a photo of my husband and me on our 25th anniversary, taken at a restaurant downtown. I have had that photo on my bedroom dresser since 2003. My son and his wife came around the corner. My son's face was a color I had never seen on him before, and I have known that face for 43 years. His wife had composed herself, I'll give her that. She looked almost calm. I held up the picture frame and I said, "Explain this to me." He started talking. I'm not going to relay the whole thing because it went in circles for a while, the way these conversations do when someone is trying to find a version of the truth that makes them look a little less like what they are. The short version is this: they were underwater. They had bought a house 2 years ago at the top of the market, and the mortgage was killing them. They had a second car payment, his wife's credit cards. They'd missed 2 mortgage payments, and they were terrified of foreclosure. And somehow, in the logic of their fear, they had decided that the solution was my belongings. They weren't going to tell me. That was the part I kept coming back to as he talked. They weren't going to knock on my door and say, "Mom, we are in trouble, can you help us?" They were going to wait until I left for 2 weeks. Come into my house with a key I'd given for emergencies. Take everything of value that could fit in a rented van and sell it. Whatever they could get: furniture, jewelry, antiques. His wife had apparently already researched what my things were worth. The boxes weren't random. They had a list. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. His wife answered for him. She said, "A few weeks." I thought about every phone call in the past few weeks, every time he had asked how I was doing, every time she had texted to say they were thinking of me. It all had a different color on it now. I said, "Was this your idea?" I was looking at my daughter-in-law when I said it. She met my eyes. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said, "We made this decision together." And something in the way she said it, the quickness of it, the tidiness, told me that wasn't entirely true. But I also wasn't naive. My son was a grown man of 43 years. He had stood in my living room with a rented van in my driveway and a borrowed tool at my back door. Whatever she had planted in his head, he had done the watering. I said, "I want everything put back, right now, all of it." There was a pause, and then she started to say something about the boxes, something about some things maybe already being spoken for, and I stopped her. I said, "I don't want to hear it. Everything in that van goes back inside this house before you leave. If anything is missing, we are going to have a very different conversation." They unloaded the van. I stood in the driveway and I watched them do it. My son carried the armchair back into the living room and he set it down in the wrong place, slightly crooked, and he couldn't look at me while he did it. His wife carried boxes without speaking. It took about 40 minutes. When they were done, I walked through the house slowly and I looked at everything. The living room, the bedroom, the kitchen, the glass cabinet in the hallway where I keep a few pieces of good jewelry, not valuable to anyone else, but valuable to me. My mother's pearl earrings were still there. My grandmother's cameo brooch was still there. One thing was missing: a small silver watch that had belonged to my husband's mother. Not expensive by any objective measure, but irreplaceable. I asked about the watch. My son said he didn't know. His wife said she thought it might have gotten mixed in with some things she'd looked at and then put back. I didn't believe her. I don't believe her now. After I walked through the house, I came back to the front door and I said to both of them, "I need you to leave. And I need to think about what happens next." My son looked like he wanted to say something. His wife had already moved toward their car. Their car, not the van, which still needed to be returned. She'd gotten quiet in the way people get quiet when they realize the damage is done, and talking only makes it worse. My son stood there on my porch for a moment, and then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. I said you don't need to say anything else today. And I closed the door. I sat down in my armchair, back in its place, and I didn't do anything for a while. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I thought I would cry. I just sat there in the quiet of my own house, and I thought about the last time I had felt truly safe. And I tried to remember if that feeling had ever been real, or if I had just been lucky that it hadn't been tested before. That afternoon, I called a locksmith. I had every lock in the house rekeyed, front door, back door, garage side entry, and I kept the only 2 copies of the new keys myself. Then I called my daughter in Phoenix. That was a harder call. She was so angry, on my behalf, that she was crying before I got to the end of the story, and then I started crying too, and we were just 2 women on the phone crying about something that shouldn't have happened. She said, "Mom, you need to call the police." I thought about it for a long time, more than I probably should have. Here's the thing about having a child. It doesn't matter how old they are. There is still some part of you that remembers them as the person they were before they became whoever they are now. I remembered my son at 7 years old, helping me plant tomatoes in the backyard. I remembered him at his college graduation, the look on his face when he found us in the crowd. I was trying to hold both of those things in my hands. The 7-year-old with the tomato plants and the 43-year-old man with a tool at my back door, and figure out what I owed each of them. But then I thought about the watch. My husband's mother's watch. I called the non-emergency police line the next morning. I didn't file a formal burglary report because my son had a key. The legal situation was complicated, and I'd already had the locks changed, but I filed a report documenting what had happened. I also called a lawyer, not a big firm, just a family law attorney I'd been referred to by someone at my church. She was matter-of-fact and kind, and she told me what my options were. Civil suit for the value of missing property. A formal demand letter. She helped me draft a promissory note, a real legal document, not a handshake agreement, that laid out what my son owed me for the items that had been taken or damaged, and what the consequences would be if he didn't make arrangements to pay. He signed it. She did not. My daughter-in-law refused to put her name on anything, and the attorney told me that was her right, but that it didn't change what my son had agreed to. The amount was $11,400, which covered a conservative estimate of the furniture and items, and left out the watch entirely, because we couldn't agree on a value for something irreplaceable. My son has been paying me back in installments. He's never missed a payment. I don't know if that means anything or not. As for my daughter-in-law, I have not seen her since she walked to that car without looking back. My son came once, about 6 weeks later, to drop off the first payment in person. She didn't come with him. He sat at my kitchen table, and he looked older than I'd seen him look in years, and he said very little, and I didn't ask him about her. I don't ask about her. That part of my life has gotten very quiet in a way I'm still learning to live with. I did eventually get to Phoenix. I rebooked the flight for the following week. My daughter met me at baggage claim, and she hugged me for a long time without saying anything, the way you hug someone when words would just be in the way. I spent 9 days with her. We went to the botanical garden. We ate breakfast on her back patio every morning. She has a dog now, a big dopey golden retriever, named something ridiculous, and he slept across my feet every night, and I let him. On the last night, we sat on the patio after dinner, and my daughter asked me what I was going to do. About the house. About my son. About all of it. And I told her I didn't know yet. That I was 67 years old, and I had 31 years of my life in that house, and I wasn't ready to walk away from it because of what someone else had done inside it. I told her I'd changed the locks and filed the paperwork, and I was going to take it one season at a time. She said, "Are you going to be okay?" I thought about my armchair, back in its spot. I thought about my husband's photograph on my dresser. I thought about the watch that was still missing, the one I hadn't stopped looking for every time I opened a drawer, the one I was starting to accept I would never find. I said, "I think so. I think I'll be okay." And I meant it, not because everything was fine. It wasn't, but because I had stood in my own driveway and I had said, "Put it back," and they had. Because I had sat in my own kitchen with a lawyer and signed my name to something real. Because I was still there, in my house, in my chair, with my photograph on my dresser. Some people would have crumbled. I understand that. I'm not saying I'm stronger than anyone else. I'm saying that 67 years of your own life is a long time, and somewhere in all of it, without even noticing, you learn how to hold your ground. I still water the tomato plants every summer. I do it alone now, but I do it. I keep thinking about that armchair, not what happened around it. I've thought about that enough. I mean the chair itself. The green wingback with the brass tacks that I had reupholstered in 1998, because throwing it away felt like erasing something. My husband sat in that chair for 22 years, and on a Thursday morning in April, it was sitting in the back of a rented cargo van in my own driveway, halfway covered with a moving blanket, waiting to be sold to a stranger for whatever price my son and his wife had decided it was worth. That image is the one I come back to when I try to make sense of what happened. Not the anger. The anger came and went. What stayed was the question underneath it. How does someone convince themselves that this is acceptable? How does a person stand in their mother's living room, look at 67 years of a life, and decide that it's inventory? I don't think my son is a monster. I want to say that plainly. What I think is that he had gotten himself into a situation that scared him badly, and instead of doing the harder, more honest thing, picking up the phone, sitting down across from me, saying, "Mom, I'm in trouble," he chose the easier wrong thing. He let fear make the decision for him. And when fear is driving, you stop seeing people clearly. You start seeing solutions. That armchair stops being your father's chair and starts being $300 toward a mortgage payment. That's not a character flaw you're born with. That's what happens when someone stops asking themselves the right questions. When did I stop checking my own conscience? When did I let one bad idea become a plan? Those are the questions that could have stopped everything, and he didn't ask them. Neither did she. What I learned, what I am still learning, honestly, is that the clearest thing I did in all of this wasn't confronting them. It wasn't filing the paperwork or calling the lawyer, though those things mattered. The clearest thing I did was stand in my driveway and not collapse, not beg, not bargain with myself about whether I had somehow caused this, or whether my forgiveness was the thing that would fix it. I just stood there and said, "Put it back." That kind of steadiness doesn't come from nowhere. I think it comes from years of small decisions, of choosing honesty when it was inconvenient, of keeping your word when it would have been easier to let it slide, of not outsourcing your problems to other people. You build something inside yourself that way, quietly, without even noticing. And then one morning you need it, and it's there. I'm not saying I handled everything perfectly. The watch is still gone. There are phone calls I haven't returned. There is a relationship with my son that is present in the form of monthly deposits and absent in almost every other way. None of that is tidy. But the house is mine. The locks are new. The chair is back where it belongs, and I am still the person who plants tomatoes in the summer. That part, nobody took.